Imagine flying across the country, heart pounding with hope, only to step off the plane and realize no one even bothered to pick you up. That was me, Emily Dawson. After a 6-hour flight, all I got was a quick text telling me to call an Uber. I thought family was supposed to make you feel seen, but sometimes they just make you feel small. Have you ever shown up for people who didn't show up for you? I'd love to hear your story in the comments. Families are supposed to make you feel like you belong. Mine just made me feel guilty. I shifted my weight from one foot to the other as I stood in line at the Seattle-Tacoma airport. My boarding pass crumpled slightly from how tightly I was gripping it. All around me, travelers buzzed with energy, kids dragging oversized backpacks, parents juggling coffee cups and strollers, young couples laughing too loudly. Summer travel season was in full swing, and every gate pulsed with life. I didn't feel part of it. I hadn't felt part of much lately. The text from my mother blinked on my phone again. "It's important, Em." 4 words that somehow weighed more than my carry-on. I could have turned around. I thought about it. Really thought about it. I imagined walking straight back out to the parking garage, tossing my suitcase into the trunk of my beat-up Honda, and heading west until the mountains swallowed me whole. It would have been easy. Easier, maybe, than getting on a plane bound for a city that never really felt like home, no matter how many times I flew there. But I didn't move. Instead, I took a deep breath, the recycled airport air tasting faintly of coffee and jet fuel, and stepped forward when they called my boarding group. As I made my way down the narrow jet bridge, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the smudged glass. Tired eyes, hair pulled back in a messy bun, expression set somewhere between resignation and reluctant hope. Maybe this time would be different. The plane smelled of worn leather seats, industrial cleaner, and something faintly metallic, like cold pennies. I squeezed into my window seat and buckled in, trying to ignore the crying baby 2 rows behind me and the couple beside me already arguing softly over their seat assignments. I closed my eyes, but sleep wouldn't come. Instead, memories flickered behind my eyelids, past family reunions where I hovered at the edges of group photos, holding paper plates sagging under the weight of potluck casseroles, smiling tightly as relatives raved about Brian's latest promotion or Grace's engagement ring. Nobody ever asked about my life, about my small freelance writing gigs or the poetry I published under a pen name. It was like they didn't know what to do with me, the daughter who didn't fit their polished version of success. I shifted uncomfortably as the engines roared to life beneath us. The plane shuddered, then lifted off, pulling us higher into a cloudy gray sky. I thought about canceling the trip when Mom first brought it up 2 months ago. "It's just one weekend," she had said over the phone, her voice sugar-sweet but tight underneath. "It would mean a lot to your father and me if you made the effort." Made the effort. Like I hadn't spent years trying to earn a seat at the table, only to realize the chairs had already been claimed, the conversations already scripted, and I was just an afterthought scribbled in the margins. The seatbelt sign pinged off and the flight attendants rolled their carts down the aisle, the clink of soda cans and plastic cups a background hum to my racing thoughts. I ordered black coffee, even though I barely touched it. The bitter smell filled the small space in front of me, a reminder that I was hurtling through the air toward a place that once felt familiar and now felt like foreign territory. Outside the window, the land stretched out in a patchwork of greens and browns, rivers like veins cutting through the fields. Somewhere down there was Asheville, nestled in the Smoky Mountains, a town that wore its charm like a hand-me-down jacket, a little frayed but still loved. I tried to picture the reunion. I tried to imagine myself slipping easily into the rhythm of the family gatherings, the jokes, the photo ops, the endless rehashing of memories that felt less and less like mine. Maybe Brian would introduce his new girlfriend, a polished attorney with a name like Charlotte or Brooke. Maybe Grace would show off wedding plans with fabric swatches and Pinterest boards. And maybe I'd sit in a lawn chair under a rented white tent, sipping lukewarm sweet tea, smiling until my face hurt, pretending I didn't notice when people asked each other how they were doing and forgot to ask me. The plane began its descent, tilting slightly as the ground rushed up to meet us. My stomach twisted, but I wasn't sure if it was the altitude or the anxiety pulling deeper by the minute. Maybe this time would be different. Maybe they'd notice me. Maybe I wouldn't feel like a shadow flickering around the edges of their perfect frames. The tires hit the runway with a jolt, and the baby 2 rows back howled louder. I clutched the armrest until the plane slowed to a crawl, taxiing toward the terminal. Passengers around me jostled for their bags, stretching and yawning, already chattering about rental cars and hotel reservations. I stayed seated, letting them pass, my heart pounding a nervous rhythm against my ribs. I wanted to believe things could change, that people could grow into spaces they never used to fit, that families could open the locked doors of old habits and let someone new walk through. But deep down, I already knew better. Nothing says, "we missed you," like making you call an Uber. I stood outside Asheville Regional Airport with my suitcase balanced against my leg, the sticky southern air clinging to my skin like a second layer. Travelers spilled out of the sliding doors behind me, hugging family members, high-fiving friends, gathering into cheerful clusters. Everywhere I looked, people were being welcomed home, except me. I glanced at my phone. It had been over 40 minutes since the plane landed. No call, no text, no sign of anyone pulling up curbside with a homemade "welcome back" sign or even a casual wave. I called the house, feeling foolish even as I pressed the button. My mother answered on the third ring, her voice bright and distracted. "Emmy, you made it?" "Yeah," I said, adjusting my grip on the phone. "I'm outside baggage claim." There was a clatter in the background, the muffled sound of people laughing. "Oh, honey, we're just swamped here setting up. Could you grab an Uber? It's just crazy today." I swallowed the sharp sting rising in my throat. "Sure," I said, forcing a lightness I didn't feel. "No problem." "We can't wait to see you," she chirped before hanging up. I stared at my phone for a second longer, like maybe if I held it just right, it would offer an apology that never came. Ordering an Uber was easy enough. The car, a dusty blue Toyota Corolla, rolled up within 10 minutes. The driver, a middle-aged man with a baseball cap and a booming laugh, greeted me warmly as I slid into the back seat. "Heading to a party?" he asked, eyeing the welcome banners visible through the open trunk of someone else's car. "Family reunion," I said, trying to keep my tone neutral. "Aw, that's nice," he said, pulling into traffic. "Ain't nothing better than getting everyone together with some good food and music. You picked a fine weekend, too. Big BBQ festival downtown. Smells like heaven everywhere you go." I nodded, offering a polite smile he couldn't see in the rearview mirror. His voice blended into the warm hum of the car's AC, and outside, the landscape blurred by. Rolling green hills, clusters of old brick buildings, churches with white steeples piercing the heavy gray sky. I remembered the first time I came home from college freshman year, dragging an overstuffed duffel bag and a battered laptop, hoping someone, anyone, would be waiting at the gate. No one had. I'd caught a cab back then, too, telling myself it wasn't a big deal, but it had been. It still was. The drive to the house didn't take long. As we turned onto the familiar winding road, the memories rushed in whether I wanted them to or not. Kids riding bikes in circles down cracked sidewalks. The old grocery store where I used to spend hours flipping through magazines. The little gas station that still sold glass bottles of Coke. The Uber driver pulled up to the Dawson family home, a large white house with a wraparound porch and neat rows of crepe myrtle trees lining the driveway. From the street, it looked almost festive. Banners that read, "Welcome Home, Dawson Family," flapped lazily in the humid breeze. Long tables were being set up in the backyard, workers bustling around with folding chairs and tubs of iced drinks. The smoky scent of BBQ, ribs, pulled pork, and sweet corn on the grill curled through the air. No one looked toward the driveway. No one noticed me. I thanked the driver, tipped him extra for the cheerful ride I hadn't earned, and hauled my suitcase toward the porch, the wheels thunking over the uneven wooden steps. Inside, the house buzzed with activity. Relatives I barely recognized zipped past with trays of food and arms full of decorations. Someone was stringing up mason jar lights across the ceiling beams, their laughter spilling out like a burst pipe. I stood in the entryway for a full minute, waiting for someone to realize I was there, waiting for a hug, a smile, even a passing, "Hey, you made it." Nothing. I quietly wheeled my bag upstairs to what used to be my room. The door still had the faded sticker I'd put up when I was 14, an outline of a mountain range with the words, "Adventure awaits." I pushed it open and blinked against the sudden flood of dust motes dancing in the golden evening light. My bed was gone. In its place were cardboard boxes stacked to the ceiling, plastic bins labeled Christmas, old tax returns, Brian's college stuff. My bookshelf sagged under the weight of junk, extension cords, mismatched light bulbs, half-empty paint cans. The only signs that it had once been my sanctuary were the trophies still perched above the closet: debate team, spelling bee, a dusty fourth-place ribbon from a county fair photography contest. I perched on the edge of an abandoned armchair shoved into a corner, feeling like an intruder in a life I barely recognized. Downstairs, I heard the clatter of more voices, the clink of glasses, the pop and hiss of something on the grill. They were gathering without me, folding me neatly into the background just like always. I leaned my head back against the wall, closing my eyes. The cicadas outside sang a low, vibrating song, the southern night swelling with humidity and the promise of a thunderstorm. I could smell sweet tea and grilled peaches from the backyard, hear the soft twang of a country playlist wafting through the open windows. It should have felt like home. Instead, it felt like I was visiting a memory someone else had rewritten without me. The walls still had my high school trophies, but the girl who won them didn't live here anymore. They called it a family reunion, but it felt more like a PR event. I stood at the edge of the Dawson backyard, clutching a sweating glass of lemonade, watching the crowd swell under the giant white tent. Fairy lights blinked above us like lazy fireflies, casting everything in a golden haze that couldn't quite mask the heat or the heaviness of the southern air. Conversations buzzed all around, clinking glassware, bursts of laughter, the sharp scent of pork ribs sizzling on the grill, mingling with the syrupy sweetness of peach cobbler cooling on the buffet tables. I moved from group to group, slipping into circles where polite smiles and half-hearted hugs were exchanged like business cards. Cousins I barely remembered asked surface-level questions, their eyes already darting over my shoulder for someone more interesting before I finished answering. Brian was holding court near the bar, his voice booming with the confidence of a man who had never once been told to lower his expectations. Family clustered around him, nodding enthusiastically as he detailed his tech startup's latest funding round. Grace floated nearby, her left hand flashing with a diamond big enough to catch the fading sunlight. She waved around color swatches for bridesmaid dresses, her laugh high and musical, as if her entire life was unfolding exactly the way she had sketched it out back in high school. I tried to wedge myself into a conversation. Someone asked what I'd been up to, and I smiled, heart hammering as I told them about my freelance writing, how I'd been building a small portfolio, landing gigs with local magazines, dreaming bigger every day. "Oh, that's cute," one of my aunts said, reaching over to squeeze my arm like I was a child showing off a crayon drawing. "Good to have hobbies." Hobbies. The word sat heavy in my stomach, souring the taste of lemonade on my tongue. I drifted toward a different group, catching snippets of praise for Grace's wedding venue, a restored vineyard with white barns and rolling hills. Brian's girlfriend, polished and pretty in a floral dress, gushed about their upcoming European vacation. No one asked me where I lived now. No one asked what stories I was writing, what dreams I was chasing. I was invisible, a prop in the carefully staged photo of our perfect family. The flash of a memory struck me. High school, sophomore year, the night of the academic awards banquet. They forgot to call my name for the poetry contest. I sat frozen at my table while the applause rolled on for the others. Samantha Reed, sitting next to me, had stood up anyway, clapping loudly, forcing the room to look my way, even when the organizers tried to move on. That small act had meant more than any certificate. I missed her tonight. Missed the way she saw me when no one else seemed to know I was there. I was jolted from the memory by the clinking of a microphone against glass. Helen, standing at the front of the tent, beamed out at the gathered crowd. She wore her best pearls, her hair freshly curled, the portrait of a woman who had everything under control. "Thank you all for coming," she trilled. "It means so much to have our family together again, especially to celebrate Brian's incredible success with his company and Grace's upcoming wedding." There was a round of applause, cameras flashing, the kind of moment that would look beautiful in tomorrow's Instagram posts. "And of course," Helen added, almost as an afterthought, "we're so proud of all our children." My name wasn't mentioned, not once. I pressed the glass tighter against my palm, feeling the condensation trickle down my wrist like cold sweat. Later, standing near the dessert table, I overheard two second cousins whispering behind a stack of paper plates. "Is Emily still trying to make it as a blogger?" One of them snickered, the word blogger dripping with the same tone you might use for failed magician or professional daydreamer. I smiled so tightly my cheeks hurt. Inside, something splintered, not loudly, not dramatically, more like a fine hairline crack, invisible to everyone else but impossible to ignore once you knew it was there. I backed away from the table, ignoring the desserts, ignoring the small talk bubbling up around me like a pot left too long on the stove. The air under the tent felt thick, pressing down against my skin, suffocating me in 100 invisible ways. I needed air, and maybe a reminder of who I used to be before I started believing I didn't matter. I smiled through the speeches and the toasts, but inside, something was cracking wide open. The Dawson backyard had transformed into something almost magical. Strings of fairy lights zigzagged above the tables, casting a soft glow over faces flushed from heat and laughter. The sharp, smoky scent of bonfires drifted in from the far edge of the property, mingling with the low hum of a country song floating through hidden speakers. Cicadas sang backup, their endless rhythm pulsing through the heavy southern night. It would have been beautiful if I hadn't felt like a ghost drifting through my own family gathering. I perched on the edge of a folding chair, a sweating cup of sweet tea forgotten in my hands, as one toast bled into another. Uncle Darren raised his glass first, praising Brian's vision and entrepreneurial spirit, painting him as a titan of industry before he even turned 30. Brian smiled modestly, but his chest puffed out like he was already posing for a magazine cover. Then came Aunt Lisa, her voice catching as she gushed about Grace's upcoming wedding, how proud the whole family was of her grace, pun fully intended, and elegance. The words washed over me like static. No one mentioned me, not once. The spotlight swung wide and bright over Brian and Grace, while I sat in the shadows, clapping politely, the familiar ache blooming deep in my chest. I tried to remind myself that this wasn't new, that growing up I had learned early how to swallow disappointment without choking on it. I'd been the quiet kid, the one who colored inside the lines, the one who didn't rock the boat. "Keep the peace, Emily," Mom would say whenever I bristled at being overlooked. "Don't be difficult." So I hadn't been. Not once. I sipped the lukewarm tea, tasting the bitterness more than the sugar. The clinking of a fork against a glass snapped me out of my thoughts. Helen stood at the head table, beaming under the fairy lights, her arm looped proudly through Brian's. "I just want to say," she began, her voice warm and rehearsed, "how blessed we are to have such bright, successful children. Brian, with his brilliant company, leading innovation in his field. Grace planning a wedding that promises to be the event of the season. We couldn't be prouder of our shining stars." The words landed like stones in my stomach. Both of our shining stars. Not 3, 2. I didn't even flinch when I heard it. I just sat very still, the night pressing heavier against my skin. Then came the moment that tipped the scales. A cousin I hadn't spoken to since I was 12, red-faced from too much sweet wine, leaned over from another table and called out loud enough for everyone to hear, "Maybe next year Emily will have something to celebrate too." The laughter that followed wasn't cruel exactly. It was casual, unthinking, the kind of laughter that stings worse than cruelty because it doesn't even realize it's causing harm. Even Helen chuckled, pressing a hand to her chest like she was embarrassed by her wayward child but not surprised. I set my cup down slowly. My hands didn't shake. I stood, lifting my own glass. The conversations died one by one, like candles snuffed out in a breeze. I felt every pair of eyes turn toward me, some curious, some wary, some already moving past me to the next moment. I smiled, a real smile, steady and unshaking. "Thank you all," I said, my voice even and clear in the thick night air. "It's been enlightening to be here, to hear all these beautiful celebrations of success." A few people shifted in their seats. Helen's smile froze on her lips. "And while not everyone gets the standing ovations or the grand toasts," I continued, lifting my glass a fraction higher, "some of us learn how to celebrate ourselves, even when no one else remembers to." The silence was profound. Even the cicadas seemed to hesitate. Helen's expression shifted, the polite mask slipping just enough to show something sharp underneath. Disapproval, maybe, or fear. I didn't care. I took a sip from my glass, savoring the tart punch of lemonade, and sat down again with the same quiet dignity I wished I'd found years ago. No one clapped. No one laughed. No one rushed to fill the awkward space I had cracked wide open. For once, I didn't apologize for taking up space. The farther I walked from that house, the lighter my chest felt. The night wrapped around me like an old worn quilt as I left the backyard behind. I didn't rush. I just let my feet move, one step after another, down the quiet streets of Asheville. The air still buzzed faintly with the sound of cicadas and distant laughter. But here, a few blocks away, the world had softened. Porch lights glowed behind lace curtains. A dog barked once and then fell silent. My phone buzzed in my hand, an afterthought. I stared at it for a moment, debating. Then my fingers moved almost without thinking. "Me, you awake?" It didn't take long. "Samantha. Always. Come over." The address hadn't changed. I slipped my phone back into my pocket and turned down a side street where the pavement cracked under heavy oak trees. The bookstore cafe sat at the corner, its windows lit warm against the dark, like a lighthouse calling me in. Inside, it was everything the Dawson house wasn't. Cozy, cluttered, alive. Worn hardwood floors creaked under my steps. The walls were lined with shelves packed to the brim. Indie novels, memoirs, poetry, chapbooks, and local art hung in between, all splashes of color and crooked frames. Samantha sat behind the counter, a chipped mug cradled between her hands, her hair pulled back in a messy bun that looked effortless and perfect at the same time. She looked up and smiled, the kind of smile that didn't need words to make you feel welcome. "Coffee's hot," she said, sliding a second mug toward me, "and the couch doesn't bite." I crossed the room and dropped onto the lumpy old sofa near the window, the springs sighing under me. The coffee smelled rich and slightly burnt, exactly the way I liked it. For a while, we just sat there, sipping in comfortable silence. The bookstore hummed with the faint whir of an overhead fan and the occasional rustle of pages flipping somewhere deeper inside. "You look like you've been through it," Samantha said finally, her voice low and kind. I laughed, a short, surprised sound. "You could say that." She didn't push. She never had. That was one of the things I loved most about her. She made space without demanding explanations. I set my mug down carefully on the battered coffee table. "Do you ever feel like you outgrow your family?" Samantha leaned back, tucking one leg under her. "Every day," she said simply. "Blood doesn't always mean belonging." The words settled into the cracks inside me, filling spaces that had ached empty for too long. "When we were kids," I said, staring into my mug, "I used to dream about opening a place like this. Books, coffee, mismatched furniture, a place where people could just exist without needing to prove anything." "You still could," she said. I shook my head. "Feels a little late for that." Samantha smiled that small, knowing smile of hers. "Dreams don't expire, Em. They just wait for you to remember them." She stood up and disappeared behind the counter, returning a moment later with a battered leather notebook and a pen. "Start small," she said, handing them to me. "Write it down. Tell the truth." I hesitated, the weight of the blank page heavier than it should have been. My hands trembled slightly as I flipped the cover open. "What if it's stupid?" I whispered. "What if it's exactly what someone else needs to hear?" Samantha countered gently. I bit my lip and nodded. The clock above the door ticked softly as I hunched over the notebook, the pen hovering over the first line. My hand moved slowly at first, the words scratching out in uneven bursts, then faster, like they'd been waiting all along for permission to surface. Uninvited guests. That's what I called the essay, because that's what it felt like, being treated like a guest in a life I was supposed to belong to. Being reminded in 100 tiny ways that my story didn't fit neatly into the picture my family wanted to paint. I wrote about the reunion, about standing in a backyard filled with fairy lights and laughter and feeling more alone than ever, about learning to clap for myself when no one else remembered to. Hours slipped by unnoticed. The coffee cooled, the bookstore grew quieter, and still I wrote. When I finally sat back, my shoulders aching and my fingers cramped, it was nearly 3 a.m. Samantha had dozed off in an armchair, a half-finished book resting open on her chest. I stared at the glowing screen of my laptop, the essay now typed, raw and imperfect, but mine. My heart hammered so loudly I thought it might wake her. The publish button hovered there like a dare. I hesitated, then I clicked it. No fireworks, no applause, just the soft whir of the ceiling fan and the steady beat of my own heart. Maybe no one would read it, or maybe someone, somewhere, needed it as much as I did. Some endings don't come with fireworks, just a deep, certain breath. The sky over Asheville was still smudged with mist when I slipped out of Samantha's bookstore. The streets were quiet, save for the soft rattle of delivery trucks and the clink of keys as bakery owners unlocked their doors. The air smelled of rising dough and damp pavement, and for the first time in a long time, I wasn't in a hurry to be anywhere else. I wandered with no real destination, the sun slowly stretching its golden fingers over the mountains. In my pocket, my phone buzzed once. I pulled it out, already guessing who it would be. Helen Dawson. "We need to talk." I stared at the screen, waiting for some surge of anger, guilt, sadness, something. But all I felt was a calm clarity, like a window that had finally been wiped clean. Without a second thought, I pressed delete. No drama, no fanfare, just one small, sure choice. The world didn't end when I let go. It simply kept turning. I found myself outside a little bookstore I hadn't noticed the night before, its windows fogged slightly from the warmth inside. A bell chimed gently when I pushed open the door. The place smelled like paper and wood polish and cinnamon. An old man behind the counter nodded at me but didn't say a word, giving me the kind of quiet welcome that felt like a gift. I browsed for a while, running my fingers along the spines of books, breathing in the possibilities. Near the checkout, a small display caught my eye, journals, stacked neatly in a woven basket. One in particular, plain leather, soft and worn around the edges, seemed to call out to me. I bought it without hesitation. Outside, I found a bench by the river where the morning mist still clung to the water like a dream not quite ready to wake. I sat, opening the journal on my lap, the blank pages fanning out like a clean slate. The old Emily, the one who used to stare out her bedroom window, dreaming of bigger, braver things, whispered inside me. She hadn't gone anywhere after all. She'd just been waiting for me to remember. I pulled a pen from my bag, its weight familiar in my hand, and began to write. Not about what my family thought success looked like, not about fitting into the spaces they'd made too small for me, about stories that mattered, dreams that still breathed under the dust, little victories like standing up at a family table and refusing to shrink. I sketched out ideas for essays, maybe even a book someday. Nothing flashy, nothing meant to prove anything, just honest words from a life I was finally willing to claim as my own. A gentle breeze stirred the river, sending ripples across its surface, and I watched the sunlight catch them, making everything shimmer. My phone stayed silent in my pocket. I didn't check it. There would be more reunions, more birthdays, more holidays. Some I might show up for, some I might let pass without guilt. Healing, I realized, wasn't a finish line. It was 1,000 small decisions made in the quiet. I closed the journal, tucking it under my arm, and stood up. I wasn't running anymore. I was finally walking toward something real. Even without fireworks, I walked that morning feeling more certain than ever. There are journeys that are not noisy, but quietly help us return to ourselves. I have learned that love does not always come from where we expect it, but that does not make it any less precious. When we learn to give ourselves respect, the world begins to open up new paths. If this story touches you, I hope you find a peaceful path in your heart too, and don't hesitate to share your thoughts with me.